This episode is brought to you by Squarespace.
All right, so I noticed something the other day that randomly came to mind, and that was that point and shoot cameras are starting to become extremely popular among street photographers. I was in San Francisco just doing some street photography for a video, and I ran into a couple of different photographers out there, and 3 out of 4 of them were holding onto various different point and shoot cameras. One of them had a GR2, the other guy had like a Fuji XA10, I believe it was, and then this other guy had like this older Nikon Coolpix A camera. But it's starting to surprise me how many people are starting to switch to kind of these smaller cameras as their everyday point and shoot street photography go-to tools. And so I want to make a video today just to talk about why point and shoot culture in street photography is going to be huge moving forward. I want to talk a little bit about how I personally feel about these cameras, how they play into my workflow, some of the pros, some of the cons, maybe even compare it to something like my Leica over there. But I will say this right now, you guys, having a smaller point and shoot camera in street photography is game changing, and hopefully this video can sway you into maybe getting your own. Okay, so I honestly think this is kind of old news because the GR2 was really kind of the smaller point and shoot camera that started it all for most street photographers that shoot point and shoots. What am I saying? Long story short, when the GR2 came out, it was an instant hit among street photographers. It's small, you can change the batteries out pretty quick. You had a 16 megapixel sensor with a 28 millimeter lens. Being able to have a smaller camera hold an APS-C sensor, 28 millimeter focal length, 16 megapixels, when the GR2 came out was huge, and it was an instant hit because it's just such a small camera that you can slip into your pocket and go for convenience sake. Now, in terms of functionality, I want to talk a little bit about why having a smaller camera can do so much good in your street photography. And I'm going to use my photo project from the Philippines, it's called Philippines, as kind of an example why point and shoots are amazing for street photography. So here is my Philippine zine. This was the photo project I released in 2020. And yeah, there's only about 110 copies. So if you guys have one, let me know what number you guys got because I numbered them on the back here. Anyways, moving forward, the Philippine zine was very interesting because while we were out in the Philippines making photographs for the photo essay, I was shooting with the Voigtlander Bessa R2A, which of course is a film camera. Now, about halfway through the trip, my film camera broke. I don't know what happened, it got jammed, and I wasn't able to use the film camera after the first week. And so what ended up happening was I had to pretty much use the Ricoh GR2 for the rest of the entire trip. Now, I was a little bummed out that I wasn't going to be shooting film from that point forward, but I will say the GR2 came in clutch, and it's honestly what I feel like made the Philippine zine really work. And so I'm going to show some photographs from this while talking about the impact of shooting with a smaller camera did for me in terms of street photography. So most street photographers, when they make photographs with something like, for example, a mirrorless camera or even like a Leica, it's a larger camera. And when somebody sees you, especially when you're doing like candid stuff, obviously they know you're making photographs regardless of if you have the camera, pointing at them or in a different direction. When I put this camera up to my face though, I don't know, for some reason I think people are automatically more intimidated when they see a larger camera, for example, like this one. But when you have something like this, the Ricoh GR2, it's similar to what an iPhone would give off. And so if you have this in front of you and you're making photographs like this, I feel like people perceive you as less of a threat and you're able to make photographs that you wouldn't be able to make with something like this, just because this looks like you're trying to actually do something. And I don't know, I don't want to, downplay what the GR2 is as a camera because it's an amazing tool, but I think the smaller form factor really plays a huge role in making people around you just act more comfortable. And when that happens, of course, you are going to get better candid street photographs, you're going to make better scenes, and you're going to be less disruptive to the people around you. And so I guess that's kind of the first advantage of shooting with the GR2 or just any kind of smaller point and shoot camera. It's a little bit more discreet, it's a little bit smaller, and a lot of people are going to feel more at ease with this thing than they would with something a lot bigger. Just imagine like a DSLR in front of your face. Now, before we actually move on, you guys, I want to just give a huge thank you and shout out to our sponsor for this episode, the good folks over at Squarespace. Squarespace is your all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence and run your business. Now, any photographer, videographer, artist, anybody that wants to create something that is their own needs to have their own website to be able to portray not only their work, but also get clientele. And one of the best ways to do that and get started with a website is through Squarespace. Now, if you're like me and you don't know how to build your own website, that is perfectly fine. Squarespace has you covered. They give you tons of different templates that you can use to get started. And they also give you the option to make an e-commerce store, a portfolio, as well as even a blog. If you're a creative in 2021, there is absolutely no excuse to have your own website. So if you guys want to get started with your own website, head over to squarespace.com/KingJapes and enter promo code KingJapes at checkout for 10% off of your first purchase of a domain or website. Thank you, Squarespace, for sponsoring this episode, but let's get back into it. So back to the story about the Philippines. So as I was photographing in the Philippines with the GR2, what I noticed was that because I had a smaller camera, I can instantly just walk into different, scenarios, different settings that I generally wouldn't be in with a camera like this. I don't know why, but having something smaller and even being able to just put it in your pocket made me feel a lot more comfortable just to venture out into like countrysides where I generally wouldn't go. For example, in the Philippines, you're going to be on a lot of boats. The Philippines has a lot of islands, and so but having something like this and just being able to slip it in your pocket, again, it brings you to more places that you generally wouldn't be in with a larger camera. So, here are some images from a boat while we were island hopping, and different angles like this. So like this spread right here was taken with the GR2. As you can see, walking the streets here in the Philippines, just being able to have that smaller camera was so convenient because it was just ready to go, tucked away in the pocket at all times, never really having to leave my side. And so I guess that's the first real advantage of shooting with a smaller camera. All right, so the second reason why I think point and shoots are taking over is simply because these cameras are getting ridiculously good. For example, the GR2 with the 28mm lens and 16 megapixels, that's really all you need for street photography. Not to mention, this camera can do a bunch of other things. Like, it has macro mode. It has this is the newer version. This is the GR3, but the GR3 has something called highlight weighted metering, which essentially is going to black out all of your shadows because it only meters for the highlights. And it gives you this really nice kind of slide film look that a lot of people like in street photography. And so if that's something that you're into, you don't even really need to adjust your exposure compensation. It's always just going to meter for the highlights. And so different cameras are gonna give you different features. Personally, again, this is not like a Ricoh GR ad or whatnot. These are just the two cameras that I use very consistently when it comes to street photography. Now, as much as I praise these point and shoots, I will say there are a lot of things still that I feel like are missing on them. And I want to talk about some of the negative things that come with shooting with a smaller camera. Number one would be the ability to manual focus your lens. Now, granted, there are some cameras that will allow you to control your focus through kind of like this little ring. But for the most part, smaller cameras like this are going to be mostly autofocus or, a version of manual focus like snap focus, for example. And in my opinion, the way to go for focusing in terms of street photography is manual focus all the way. Secondly would be the overall feel of these larger cameras. There's just so many cameras out there that have really, really great shooting experiences like the Nikon F3. And sometimes I miss that. As great as these tools are, these smaller point and shoot cameras, they also feel, very repetitive. I don't want to say redundant, but it almost just seems too good. Like, it's always working great. But the third and final negative thing about point and shoot cameras that personally is a deal breaker for me is the inability to be able to change your lenses. Now with point and shoot cameras, because they are so small, they have fixed lenses. The GRs have 28mm lenses, and if you want to shoot with a more narrow focal length, the only other option on these cameras that you can possibly, get away with is to crop your photograph in post. They have like a weird cropping feature, but there's no real ability to be able to change your lens out. And I'm not talking about like adapters or, kind of these weird gadgets. I'm talking about taking that lens, taking it off, and putting a completely different focal length on that camera. But honestly, you guys, other than that, if you can look past these three kind of negative points, point and shoot cameras are as good as it gets. You have a smaller camera body that is very convenient in being able to put into a pocket. It's great for travel. It's great for being in places where, larger cameras are going to make you stand out and feel uncomfortable. These cameras, by the way, are like dead silent. So when you take a photograph, nobody is ever going to hear your shutter sound. And it almost just seems like these cameras are too good to be true. They're fantastic tools. They work really, really well, but they also still can get very, very boring just because of how good these things are. And it's kind of weird to say. I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about, but that is kind of my whole thing about point and shoots taking over the street photography world. I don't personally think that it's going to completely push out all of your other cameras like your Leicas or your mirrorless cameras from Fuji, but I do feel like it's going to play a big role in the near future in terms of what people are carrying out on the streets when you go. But with that said, you guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. I want to turn the mic over to you though and just ask you guys, what is your opinion on point and shoot cameras? It doesn't have to be street photography related. Let me know down in the comments section below what cameras you guys are shooting, maybe what features you would like to see, because I want to get a conversation just started on this. I think it's interesting to hear what other people are saying, and so comment down below if you guys have time. But thank you so much for checking out this video. I'll see you guys in the next one. As always, Minolta Gang.